welcome back to Cruising as Crew. My name is Lucy and today we are going to discuss 10 things that you should take into consideration when going out in port as a crew member when you work on board a cruise ship. But before we start, I just want to remind you to pop over to my website cruisingascrew.com, check out my career guides, and also if you want to get in touch with me you can do there via the Ask Lucy page, and also you can sign up to my newsletter where I share tips on how to become a successful crew member. But let's get into the video. So the first thing you will need to consider is the ship regulations if you are going to buy medication out in port. This isn't so much of an issue if you are buying medication in a pharmacy in England or America, but let's say you are buying painkillers from a pharmacy in Cozumel, Mexico. The painkillers that you can get over the counter in Mexico are painkillers that you would need a prescription for in England or the US. So it's not a case of like you shouldn't buy them. However, you are going to need to inform the cruise ship that you have them and that you are taking them, because the cruise ship drug medicine regulations are very different to those in Mexico. If you start taking these very strong painkillers that you bought outside in Mexico and you get called in for a random drug test on the cruise ship, very strong painkillers are going to show up as a drug, like you're taking a recreational drug. So if you bring these painkillers back on board, you need to go straight to the medical centre and say, hey, I've just bought these painkillers outside because I've got a headache, or this is wrong and I want this for this. I'm just letting you know that I will be taking these. And the medical centre will most likely just make a note of it on your records. So if anything happens to you, or if you are called for a random drug test and it shows up that you've got drugs in your system, they can refer back to their notes and be like, okay, the reason that drugs have shown up in your system is because you're actually taking this and you told us about it, so it's fine. It's too late to tell the medical centre, oh, well, actually I'm taking these painkillers when you're having the drug test. So just bear that in mind if you are going to buy any kind of drugs that, you know what I mean, like any kind of painkillers or stuff outside. You just need to make sure with the ship that it's okay that you're taking them while you are working on board. The second thing you need to consider, this is actually a positive thing for crew members. If you are docked in a popular cruise ship port, maybe it's Juneau, Alaska, maybe it is St. Thomas in the Caribbean, a lot of places in these destinations will offer discount for crew because there's so many cruise ships and crew members coming in. So it's actually beneficial for them to try and lure crew members into their business establishment by offering a crew discount. So if you go out for lunch, if you go to a cafe, if you go to a museum, it is always worth mentioning that you are a crew member, because they might just have a crew discount. This happened to me a few weeks ago. I went into a little trinket shop in Key West to buy a magnet, because you all know I love to collect magnets, and I mentioned that I was a crew member and I got a discount. So popular cruise ship ports, always worth mentioning that you are a crew member to try and get the cheapest price possible. Number 3. So when you get off in port, obviously you are not working, it is your time off, it is your time to relax. However, depending on what job you have on board, whether it's like a public facing job or not, you may be recognised by people who are cruising on your cruise ship. So if a passenger comes up to you while you are out in port, while you are on your time off, and asks you for help, maybe they ask you for directions, for some knowledge on the cruise ship, I don't know, whatever they need to know, you are obligated to help them, because even though you are not working, you are still representing the company, because they recognise that you are a crew member that works for that company. So this is what I mean when I've said in previous videos, you know, it's hard working on a cruise ship because you never actually get to switch off, because even when you are out in port, you may be recognised and you still have to just go into work mode. The next one is to do with alcohol. So we've all talked about the drinking limit on cruise ships. I've done many videos on it. It is okay for crew members to have a drink as long as it is, you know, within reason. So Something you need to take into consideration: if you are going out in port and you are going to have a drink, you're going to have a glass of wine with lunch or a cocktail, you do need to take into consideration like when you are starting work, but also like the heat and the time of day. So alcohol, as we all know, if you drink alcohol, it affects you differently depending on so many factors. Like, I can have a gin and tonic at 7 in the evening and feel fine. If I have a gin and tonic at 12 in the afternoon, I'm like, woohoo! Especially if it's hot. Like out in Key West, I had a glass of wine and I was under the limit, but it definitely went straight to my head because it was the middle of the day and it was scorching outside. And also you need to think about like, okay, maybe I should eat something before I have a drink. And I know this advice sounds obvious, but you'd be surprised at how many people don't actually take this into consideration, or they go out and they have a drink but they don't think about the fact that they have to start their shift in like an hour. Something else is you're gonna have to get back on the ship, and if you look drunk, then you are going to be pulled to one side, you are going to be asked to take a breathalyzer test, and you're going to be fired on the spot. And there's no debate. But please just bear it in mind, because it is so easily avoidable, but yet so many people get fired because they've gone over the limit. This is a bit of a weird one, but you need to take into consideration the time. So this happened the other day. We were in, I think Miami had just had their daylight saving. There's quite a while ago actually. Had their daylight saving. So Miami had gone forward 1 hour, but I don't think Cozumel had, or something like that. So when we docked in Cozumel, the cruise ship time was 1 hour ahead of Cozumel. So like that was a real like headache, because you got off the ship, you thought you got off the ship at 11 AM, but you actually got off at 10 AM in Cozumel. But the reason you need to take this into consideration, because this has happened to me, this happens like quite a lot. The ship time is different to the country's time or the port's time. And the reason you have to take it into consideration is because obviously you have a back on board time. So if you're in Cozumel and you have to be back on board by 5 PM ship time, and the ship is 1 hour ahead of Cozumel, if you accidentally get confused and you go to get back on board the ship at 5 PM Cozumel time, it's going to be 6 PM on the ship. So you've missed it. Does that make sense? So this is something that you really need to be on the ball with. You know, if there is a different time in port on the ship, you have to make sure that your phone is set to manual and it's not going to automatically flip. Get like an analog watch, so you have to manually change the time. There's so many people who have like iWatches and all of these smart watches, and they're wonderful, but like they automatically change time, which is great in pretty much any other scenario. But when you're on a cruise ship and you need to stay on ship time, it's not really ideal when the watch decides that it's gonna change time. The next one also kind of follows on from like missing the ship as a crew member. So it's very scary. I think it's everyone's worst nightmare, crew member and passenger, that you would possibly miss the cruise ship. Arguably, it's kind of worse for a crew member because you have also automatically lost your job if you are left behind by the cruise ship. Now, what happens if you do miss it is your passport will be given to the port agent. So when you will finally come back to the port, theoretically, you will be able to get your passport. But that is it. That is it. So you will have whatever is on you, whatever you went out with, and your passport. So for this reason, I always take like a debit card or a credit card. Even if I'm like, I'm only going to use cash today, I always take a card, because I'm like, if the worst happens and I am left behind by the ship, I need access to money to be able to buy myself a flight out of here. You know, it's great having your passport, but if you have no money because you only took $20 out with you, then you're pretty screwed. So you don't necessarily need to take your whole wallet out with you, but I always do urge you to take like a Revolut card, a TransferWise card, a card with at least £700 to £1,000 on it. So if the worst happens, you can afford a flight out of wherever you have been left. Either go home or go to the next port where the cruise ship's going to be to get your stuff. This one is something to bear in mind for passengers and crew. But like, just because a cruise ship doesn't offer an excursion doesn't mean there's nothing to do. So some cruise lines are really good at offering crew excursions. Some aren't so good, and you have to go and like find things out for yourself. But I made this mistake on quite a lot of my cruise ships actually, and just thought, oh well, maybe because the cruise line isn't offering anything for the crew, there actually isn't that much to do. Turns out there's loads to do in a lot of places, but you just have to do a little bit of research, because sometimes the like crew activities manager on the cruise ship doesn't have time to organise crew trips, or that might not be like the main priority of their job. So if you're like on a cruise ship that's doing quite a monotonous itinerary, not that monotonous is the wrong word, but repetitive itinerary. So I'm on Scala at the moment, and every 2 weeks we do the same 3 cruises. One cruise we're in Cozumel, one cruise we're in Key West, one cruise we're in Puerto Plata, Dominican Republic. And obviously they're wonderful places, like it's beautiful, but we are doing the same thing every 2 weeks. So if you don't kind of try to keep it interesting by exploring new places and doing new things, then it is going to get monotonous. A lot of crew members get caught in the trap of being like, oh my god, this is so boring, like I'm so bored, I hate this itinerary. I would just urge you, maybe even before you go, like if you know what cruise ship you're going on, and you know you can look on Cruise Mapper and find out the itinerary, do some research on things there are to do in the ports, you know, the things that you want to see, so that you don't get caught in this loop of like, oh, I'm so bored. When you go out in port, something you need to consider is obviously the time that you need to be back on board, because usually crew back on board time is half an hour before passenger back on board time. There will most likely be a very long queue to get back on board, because obviously, it depends. Like if you're going to get back on board the cruise ship half an hour before the passengers have to be back on board the cruise ship, a lot of people are getting back on board at that time, so naturally there's going to be a queue. It doesn't really matter if you're planning to get back on board like way earlier than back on board time, but you do need to consider that there will be a queue that you have to queue up in. So like if you have to be back on board at 3:30, that doesn't mean you need to be in the queue to get back on board. That means you need to be scanning your card into the ship at 3:30. So it's no good turning up to the ship at like 3:20 and there's a half an hour queue there, because you're going to be late for the ship. Obviously you're not going to miss the ship, but you are possibly going to get a warning for being late. When you go out, you need to make sure that you keep these things safe. This is that's my safety card, that is my crew ID card, this is my I-95. Obviously you will always have your safety card and your crew card on you at all times. You need to make sure that it's safe, because you can't get on board without it. And the thing is, my friend lost his ID card in, I think, Amsterdam, like when we were on Valiant last year. And it's not so bad if it's just getting on the ship, because if you work on the ship, so people will recognise you. They're going to be like, okay, like you'll probably get a warning for losing your card. However, we know who you are, so we'll let you on. However, The people that work in the port have no idea who you are, and if you can't show your ID card, then they're not going to let you anywhere near the ship. So again, I know it sounds self-explanatory, but you really do need to be careful with this. And then also, depending on where you are in the world, you may have a visa. So I'm going around the States at the moment, which means I have my I-95 visa, so I need to show this every time I get on and off the ship in Key West and Miami, because they're obviously US ports. So a lot of people just carry it around like this, fold it up or whatever. As you can see, it is like the thinnest piece of flimsy paper. But if I lose this, or if I get this wet so all of the ink bleeds, it is $500 to replace it. So I would definitely recommend purchasing or getting your hands on like a plastic sleeve to keep it in, or getting it laminated. I'm sure someone can laminate it, because yeah, it's very expensive if you lose it. And also if you lose it, you can't get off the ship in the US ports. Not ideal. One of my friends a few weeks ago went swimming and he forgot to take his I-95 out of his trunk's pocket, and his I-95 wasn't in a plastic sleeve, it was just like this. So obviously he came out the sea, pulled a scrumpled bit of paper out, which used to be an American visa. The last one I'm going to mention is, I guess, a bit funny, but it's like safety levels. So what got me thinking about this is we go to Bimini every cruise, which is in the Bahamas, and it's a very small island. And I did a little tour, which you guys saw actually, because it was the Antoinette vlog in Bimini when we went for lunch at her house, and we had a tour of the island, and there was one clinic. There's one clinic on the island. So if you break your leg, if anything like serious happens, you're kind of screwed, because there's just that one little clinic on the island. When you're getting off the ship and you're doing all these fun things, you know, people go skydiving, people go shark diving, quad biking, you know, because there's a lot of fun excursions in these places. I mean, I know no one goes out wanting to break their leg or wanting to get, I don't know, eaten by a shark, or it's really scary if something happens and either you can't make it back to the ship, or maybe you have to be like airlifted to another country to get medical care, but you'll be alone, because obviously everyone's going to go back on the ship and the ship's going to leave without you. So just be wary when you are doing these really fun activities, and just make sure you look after yourself, because the last thing you want is to not be able to get back on the ship. But anyway, those are the things that I think you need to consider as a crew member when you go out in port. But if you can think of any more, please leave them in the comments, and if you have any questions, you can also leave them down below, or you can get hold of me over on my website via the Ask Lucy tab, or you can message me on Instagram. And yeah, definitely check out my career guides as well over on my website. But thank you so much for watching, guys. I really appreciate it, and as always, I will see you in the next video.